I'm Jonathan Gerwitz, Vice President of KGB Texas Communications, and welcome to thePoint. Today we're visiting with former Mayor Henry Cisneros and former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Glad to be with you.
And you have a new role. About a year ago, Mayor Nirenberg and Judge Wolf created a new nonprofit, Connect SA, and they asked you, Hope Andrade, and Jane Macon to serve as the tri-chairs.
Correct.
We have a number of transportation and transit organizations, both public and private. How does Connect SA fit in with those organizations?
Every one of those other major studies or looks ahead for the community has tended to focus on a mode of transportation. But what we were asked to do is look at it from the perspective of the person wanting to travel across the metropolitan area, of the individual, of the family, and see how we can integrate all this other work, all these other studies, all these other modes, and let's figure out how we can put together a sensible, coordinated transportation system that is adequate to the congestion not only that we have today, but that we're going to have when we add another million people or so in this metro between now and roughly 20 years from now, and do it in a way that doesn't break the bank.
And that's a key point, the planning aspect, and you have a history of planning. When you were mayor, back in the 1980s, we had Target 90, and very forward-looking. I think it was probably the first time the city ever engaged in that kind of planning process. So how does Connect SA fit into that? What's the overview, the high-level view of Connect SA?
Well, there have been several other large-scale planning efforts for the community at large that included transportation, the latest being SA Tomorrow.
Right.
This is building on that portion of SA Tomorrow, which is transportation, and looking at it in the perspective that I just suggested, which is to say, how does it really work for individuals? How do all of the modes of transportation get integrated? And I think what we're really attempting to do is not only think in terms of transportation, but because it's related to SA Tomorrow, link it into issues like how do we grow our jobs base? How do we get people to school? So this is an attempt to really think about transportation in the context of building a city that works.
It's an important point because people, when they look at transportation issues, the number one issue people look at is congestion. And we know, as you mentioned, we're adding 1 million people to the population over the next 2 decades. But it's more than that. It's economic development, it's education, it's higher education, it's economic mobility.
Right. It's convenience, because people are not going to make a choice for something that's really inconvenient, and it's the cost of that method of transportation. So all of those pieces fit together, and they go right to the heart of what kind of city we're going to be.
I think the plan has been very well received overall, but some people look to other cities, look at their experience in cities like Dallas or Houston or Washington, D.C. or San Francisco, and their experience with public transit is rail. And some people ask, why no rail?
Well, the simple answer is rail is very expensive. It costs 3 times as much to lay rail and then run on those fixed routes and buy that heavy rolling stock as it does to deal with some newer technologies like what's called advanced rapid transit or bus rapid transit, which is buses that are lined up in train fashion with multiple cars, but ride on dedicated roadways, not on rail itself.
And the transportation world is changing very rapidly. I mean, 2 years ago, no one was talking about scooters.
Correct.
And micro-mobility, and we don't. Who knows what's going to happen over the next 2 years.
And, you know, the technology is applicable to almost all modes of transportation. Right. So it's applicable, as I've mentioned, to buses, but it's also applicable to ride sharing. We know that Uber and Lyft wouldn't work without technology, right? And the next increment of that is going to be autonomous vehicles. So this plan calls for systems of shared ridership through a neighborhood to collect people at their door and take them to the transit point, for example. This speaks to bicycles and scooters, and protected lanes for them. It speaks to sidewalks, 200 additional miles of sidewalks. It speaks to applying technology in ways that allow people, for example, from a mobile device to be able to access the rideshare, the transit system, a scooter, or any number of other possibilities. You add to that roadways with proper signalization within the city so the traffic can flow, and enhancing the highway system with HOV lanes, high occupancy vehicle lanes for people riding two and more to a car. So all of those things come together in the context of new thinking, new technological innovations, and a pressing need to avoid congestion.
Secretary Cisneros, thank you for joining us on The Point. Thank
you.
you for all you've done for San Antonio, and thank you for taking on this new project with Connect SA.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you, and I get the point.